We'll move from the professionals to the college side of things here. Bring on Kyle Hunter for our Week 12 college football first look. Kyle, how's it going, man?
Going pretty well, a lot better than was last week at this time. Had several of the listeners reach out to me last week, and Adam, you already know this, but you have some really good listeners here at BangTheBook.
Yeah, they are good people, and I think it's nice too that you and I started this thing over 5 years ago with our college football podcast, and now it's morphed into a daily radio show, and we've got some listeners of our segment specifically here that have been with us since the start, and those are probably the people that were reaching out. So, yeah, without a doubt, those people are fantastic, and I'm glad that everyone reached out and sent you some well wishes. And, hey, if we could, we could have got you one of those comically large greeting cards and had it sent to you and had everyone sign it. But, with everyone all over the country, you can't really do that.
Yeah, logistically that one would have been difficult, but I did appreciate it, and trust me, I sound a lot better than I would have last week. I don't think anybody could have told what I was saying last week. So let's hope that today goes well, and looking forward to talking college football again. I do know that last week I missed out on talking about some really good games, and this week, gosh, the schedule terrible.
Yeah, this week we got a lot of good games to talk about, like Charlotte and Southern Miss, UMass and BYU. We can probably talk, I don't know, San Jose State, Colorado State if you want. We can hit on some of the big marquee games here this week, but I think that is a really good point to bring up here is that here in Week 12, it's kind of a different handicap because you've got a lot of flat spots for a lot of different teams out there, whether they're sandwich spots, letdown spots, look ahead spots, whatever the case may be. You seem to have a lot of games out there on the board where you have teams that just one team's probably not going to be motivated. And of course, one of the things we talked about a lot last week, and we didn't get to get your thoughts on it, is the teams that are playing to get to a bowl game, the teams that have 5 wins or 4 wins, the ones that need to win out or the ones that need one more win, you're seeing that inflation out there in the betting market this week, whereas I don't think we saw it as much last week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I do think that it's important as a handicapper to figure out how excited you think a team would be to try to get to a bowl game, because I think sometimes these lines get inflated even for teams that had such high expectations that does it really matter to them whether they get to some really terrible bowl game. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Some of these teams are obviously just going to want to get to any bowl game at all because they haven't been there in so long. A team that has those kind of goals, I think it makes sense for the odds to move in their favor and to be shaded that way. On the other hand, there are some teams that, like I say, I don't think it really matters to them if they get to a bowl game. And at this point, they're kind of ready to be done with the season. So try to differentiate there. And yeah, I think that, this week is a lot of tricky spots that even though, there aren't marquee matchups, like we say, I think there could be some pretty good spots here this week, both for sides and totals. I think, there are some interesting matchups that could, the way the matchup goes, it could be a pretty good edge either way. As far as handicapping and as far as betting, I like this week's card a decent amount. There doesn't have to be marquee matchups. And actually, for me, I think I do better when there's not a ton of marquee matchups. So I think there's still plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I think from a viewer and a fan standpoint, obviously this week is down a few notches from the previous 2 weeks. But from a handicapping standpoint, like you just said, this is the type of week that you look for because you've got those situational spots. You have those teams with that quote-unquote must-win inflation that's out there. Then you have some other teams, too, that, when I look at one as an example here, we're not going to talk in-depth about this game, but I'm sure we will throughout the week. Game 333, 334, North Carolina State and Wake Forest. You've got this NC State team that's just played a really, really difficult schedule the last few weeks. Now they're getting a comparable opponent, and I isolate that game because it's the one I'm looking at here on the card. But there are other games like that as well where you have pretty good teams that have just been playing top 15, top 20 competition, now regressing back to something that they're more used to. And you can oftentimes find value in those spots too because the betting market is so reactionary.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a pretty good point, the North Carolina State and Wake Forest game. I think North Carolina State should be at least a small favorite in that game. So that's a game that I'll at least look at here. Wake Forest getting quite a bit of credit for that win last week against Syracuse. Syracuse didn't have Dungy in that game, so Mahoney made a couple key interceptions, bad mistakes. And then obviously Syracuse's defense was not good at all. But NC State definitely taking a pretty significant step down in class. And I think there are several spots like that this week to where you have teams who have played really good opponents that are stepping down a little bit. And I will say, I do hate that several of the SEC teams have their quote-unquote bye week this week where they, Alabama plays a Mercer and other teams like that, because you could have had some tricky spots there for some of those SEC teams to where we're not really going to be able to bet on those games.
Yeah, I agree. It's disappointing to see them playing the FCS teams, but there is one SEC game here, Kentucky and Georgia, that may fall into that umbrella a little bit. And the problem with that game is that Georgia has to keep winning out, because if they win out here and obviously beat Alabama or Auburn, whoever it is in the SEC championship game, it'll probably be Alabama. If they win that game, then they're in. So that they really can't afford a letdown here. But that being said, they're favored by 3 touchdowns. So, are they motivated to go out there and cover a big number? I don't know. But those are some of the decisions that you are looking at here as we go into Week 12. Do you have any quick hitters coming out of Week 11, or are we just going to get into the games here?
Yeah, I've got a small amount of them here. I just wanted to say Toledo. Toledo's Terry Swanson, doubtful at running back with an ankle injury. Cody Thompson, we talked about him a few weeks ago, already out for the season, wide receiver. This is some really key injuries to this Rockets offense, and I think these problems really showed up last week versus a good Ohio team. And I'm really kicking myself for not taking Ohio in that game. I actually had the over. I hate double betting games unless I really like both. The over didn't cash because Toledo couldn't score. Ohio just did whatever they wanted in that game. This Ohio team catching that many points at home, I think, was a really good look. But I think Toledo is a team that's still a quality team, but you start knocking out players like Cody Thompson and Terry Swanson, that's definitely going to hurt your offense quite a bit.
That's a really interesting game, and I've got that preview up over at BangTheBook.com. But Bowling Green with Jarrett Deggy, who's the younger brother of Seth Deggy, who was the quarterback at Texas Tech, they're a different team. He's got a 6-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio, 66% completion percentage. James Morgan, who's gotten the majority of the snaps this year for Bowling Green, 45.3% completion percentage, 9-to-7 ratio. So that's another thing you want to consider here at this time of the year is that you have some of these teams that have had quarterback injuries. They've played better under one guy than another. And that's something you can look at here late in the season. And Bowling Green's in one of those spots. Plus, this is a rivalry game. Now, Toledo, of course, in a bounce-back spot, getting embarrassed by Ohio because Toledo doesn't get embarrassed by anybody. But that's a really interesting handicap on Wednesday night. And I like that because you get these games that have the big spreads, 17, 20, 21, 24, whatever the case may be. And people just sort of kind of take that game for granted or bypass it or whatever else. There are a lot of angles in those games. It's not just a high line with a blowout expected for blowout's sake. There's a lot going on in some of those games, and that Toledo Bowling Green game is one of them.
Yeah, and specifically in that Toledo Bowling Green game, I haven't broken it down enough to know whether I'm going to take Bowling Green, but I couldn't lay 17 points with Toledo in a rivalry game like that. We've seen that game be a lot closer than it should be, on paper many times in the past, because those two are really big rivals. And like you said, Bowling Green playing better on offense of late, and Toledo with some question marks. I think that's a pretty big number there. BYU also has a ton of injuries. Tanner Mangum's out for the year, obviously. Bo Hodge is questionable this week at quarterback. Look at their running back position. I think they have 4 or 5 running backs hurt. BYU has really not been good this year, but I think Kalani Sitake's had a really tough time there because there are just a ton of injuries at BYU. So I don't know if it's fair to judge him too much on this season. I think we'll see how they bounce back next year. But BYU's actually played better here in the last few weeks, but just a ton of injuries there at BYU.
Yeah, BYU taking on a little bit of money this week, up from 3.5 to 4 or 4.5 out there at several places in the market, although DSI holding tight there on the 3.5. But BYU, they got steamed against San Jose State. They got steamed against Fresno State, and they got steamed into a road favorite against UNLV last week. So the market's been on BYU 3 straight weeks here. They were faded against East Carolina, but the last 3 weeks the market's been on BYU. Looks like that's the case here again this week in the face of all those injuries against UMass. So that may be a UMass going out to Provo type thing, but still, I mean, this is one of the things, again, that I want our listeners to keep in mind. The train has kind of left the tracks a little bit for this season, but going ahead to next year, those teams that everybody's written off early on in the year, whether they lose to an FCS team or go on a really bad ATS run, late in the year, those are often teams that take on money because they're at buy points. The prices are just so low on them. Looks like that's the case for BYU here over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, it is. And, BYU's defense has been playing pretty well. So, a defense as solid as that can keep you in a game. And obviously they haven't been playing great competition. And, they're not playing great competition this week or next week either. So we'll see how they finish out the season. But this weekend, the over went 37-22. It's no wonder I had a bad week because I had quite a few unders. I think I had 6 unders and 3 overs last week. It happens from week to week. The under's still 53.37% for the year. More often than not, the under's going to hit at a higher percentage than the over for the course of the season because the public likes the over so much. But the over really had a big week last weekend at 37-22, and I really can't find any really good reason for it other than it's just one of those statistical anomalies, from week to week.
I guess maybe I'll speculate on one, and you would think that the under would be a little bit more prevalent here late in the year because you've got more weather considerations, because you've got games with bigger implications, and maybe teams tighten up a little bit. But I guess my own counterpoint to myself there would be that later in the year, maybe you've got a situation where coaches are experimenting a little bit more with underclassmen who are making mistakes on defense. Or maybe they're just opening up the playbook a little bit more on offense. Guys are a little bit more worried about their personal statistics, more so than the team record at this point. So maybe that has something to do with it, but it could also just straight up be variance.
Well, and I think last weekend there weren't really those big weather concerns that there are a lot of times this time of the year. So, there were no real weather unders that pushed it that way. So I think that was at least part of last week's change, but that can't explain all of it. The last thing I wanted to say was in weeks 12 and 13, you'd go 56.5% here in the last 8 years if you paid teams that have covered 30% of the time or less so far this year. This is a trend that really supports teams that are giving up on the season, teams that have really been a big disappointment that are just ready to be done with the season. And we talked about this a few weeks ago that you start to reach this point where teams are just done. They're ready to be done with the season. And, I think this long-term angle kind of shows that, you take a team, go against a team that's 30% or less covers, and you're 56.5% ATS in the last 8 years. Well, that's the last couple games where a team, they're just ready to be done. They're ready to move on, ready for the off season. And I think there will be several teams again this year that are like that. It's just, obviously the trick is figuring out which ones have almost no motivation.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And, of course, too, you have some of these teams that if they've been really, really bad, they're also staring at some coaching changes. And maybe they want that guy gone. Or, maybe everybody's just kind of done. And maybe they sort of get that feeling from the coach that, he knows that he's getting that pink slip at the end of the year. So kind of trickles down to the players. I think that's a very strong angle. And you just gave the percentage there and how profitable it's been. That's definitely something you want to look at here this time of the year with the teams that just don't have anything left to play for, don't have any desire to go out there and practice and film study and, all those. I mean, at the end of the day, we're still talking about young adults. We're still talking about kids that want to go out and have fun, want to party here for the holiday break and all that type of thing. So, yeah, I think that's definitely an angle to follow here this year and in future seasons as well.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. And that's all I had for the quick hitters. So I'm ready to get into the games.
All right, let's talk about some of these games here. And we touched a little bit on Toledo Bowling Green on Wednesday, but we're going to bypass the rest of the weeknight games here and head on into Saturday. And let's start with the Navy-Notre Dame game. And there's no line on this game right now as we're waiting on some injury situations. Zach Abbey, most notably for Navy. But even without a number on this game, we can illustrate some of the points that we're talking about here in terms of handicapping this week, in that for Notre Dame, last week's blowout loss to Miami ends their college football playoff hopes. They have no shot at getting back into it now. They don't have a conference title to win. Now, sure, they may have their 2 losses against conference champions, Georgia and Miami, but still, they don't have the resume and they don't have their own conference to go out there and strengthen their resume. So they take on Navy here, triple option team that's going to have a lot of pride no matter who they're playing, no matter what the situation is. Where do you have this number coming out? I don't think there's a big difference between Perry and Abby, depending on who plays in this game. But where do you have this number coming out, and what side would it make you lean towards?
Well, it's funny because I was looking at the injury report here, and I was going to mention this, but I knew we were going to talk about this game. Zach Avey is questionable, and then also Malcolm Perry questionable. You look at last week's game that Navy didn't complete a pass. They only threw 1 pass, and it was intercepted. And they won 43-40 against SMU, 72 rushes for 559 yards. I look at a lot of box scores, but that one really jumps out at you. Malcolm Perry had 33 carries for 282 yards and 4 touchdowns. So both Navy quarterbacks have played well. Perry's a better running quarterback. Aby's more of the passer. And, to me, I think that this number is probably somewhere around 18 points, something like that. And as long as Navy has one of those guys playing, my lean would be Navy here because I wouldn't want to take Notre Dame off that. It's kind of one of those spots where Notre Dame just, bubble burst situation. Because, let's be honest, they had a really good chance to be in the playoffs. And then last week's game just completely knocked them out of any chance, like you said. I think it's hard to get back up that next week and play really well. Navy will be motivated for this game. They're going to play hard. They're certainly at a disadvantage talent-wise. They have been in quite a few of their games, though, and I like this Navy coaching staff a lot. The concern with Navy would be whether they can stop the run here. But I think Navy can get their yards and score a decent amount of points, especially if they have one of those 2 quarterbacks playing. So my lean in this game would be with the midshipmen.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only way that you can look in this game. Notre Dame may go out there and dominate this one, and it really wouldn't surprise me because they've dominated a lot of teams here in their victories this season. But like you said, to get off the mat here, after going to Miami and not just losing, but getting embarrassed in the process, that says a lot to me about, maybe what Notre Dame's body of work looks like to this point. They finally played a true road game against a really good team. Michigan State outgained them badly in that 38-18 win that Notre Dame had. Michigan State just lost a turnover battle 3-0, and that was that game right there. But then to go on the road here and play Miami and get embarrassed like that, it kind of takes some wind out of the sails of everybody. Out of Brian Kelly, out of Brandon Wimbush. Josh Adams didn't look particularly effective. He's dealing with an injury. It's just one of those spots here to me where I think Notre Dame's more looking ahead to that game against Stanford next week in Palo Alto. Nice long trip. You can go see something different. You can play, a pretty premier name opponent. I just don't think they have that same, get up and go against Navy. And yeah, I don't know what this number is going to come out at, but it would certainly look like it's Navy or nothing here in this spot. We'll slide down the board a little bit from a rotation number standpoint. We'll go to the game 4:15, 4:16, well down the board for the noon kickoff between Michigan and Wisconsin. You don't see a whole lot of line moves here at this time of the year. The numbers are pretty tight. The numbers guys aren't out there grabbing too much because things are pretty close to their power ratings. This one hasn't crossed any key numbers yet. However, Michigan from +10 on the opener bookmaker to 7.5 out there in the market against Wisconsin. And, Michigan's a team that I think people have been kind of steadily dropping in their power ratings. Wolverines haven't lived up to expectations, but the fact that they're taking on money here says a lot to me.
Yeah, I'm looking at this one right here, and somebody's really laying on Michigan pretty hard here. You got 63% of the bets on Michigan and 92% of the money on Michigan. This is easily the most heavily bet game of the week so far. So Michigan's taking some pretty serious money, and it's pretty close to getting down to Wisconsin -7 at a couple books here. So, my number is Wisconsin -8. So I think it makes sense that some people took +10. At this point, I wouldn't be interested in Michigan. And I really don't know that Michigan matches up that well against Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, it would be possible to expose this Wisconsin team. I think they're very good. I don't think they're elite. But, Wisconsin hasn't played anybody. And we talked about this before the season, and I remember saying, who's going to beat Wisconsin? Because this schedule is just brutally easy. And, you look at this, and Wisconsin, they've done what they needed to do. And, Wisconsin is that same team every year. They're going to run the football. They're going to play good defense. They're that same thing again this year. I just don't know if Michigan can score enough here. I think this will certainly be a low-scoring game. And one thing I want to point out is just the early forecast for this game is pretty crazy. 25 degrees with 25-mile-per-hour winds. So, it's only Monday, so that could change a lot. But if it stays like that, that's pretty intense wind, and that's something to keep an eye on. Michigan, their offense is solely about the run. I think Wisconsin's really strong in the trenches there to where Michigan's going to have a hard time running the football. Michigan's defense has played well overall for the year, but they were really gashed by Penn State in that game at Penn State, and I think Wisconsin can get enough here. Like I said, I think my number is -8, but at this point, my lean would be Wisconsin. I think they just match up pretty well against Michigan.
Yeah, my number on this game is 9, so I'm pretty much right there where you are. And I think I remember when you asked that question of who's going to beat Wisconsin early on in the year, and I told you Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, which we're still on pace for that. And if that happens, who knows if Ohio State gets enough craziness to make it into the college football playoff. But this Wisconsin team has played nobody. And to be honest with you, the two best teams that they've played might be Florida Atlantic and Northwestern. And Florida Atlantic played right with them in that game, in a very, very weird spot for them. And then, of course, the Northwestern game, Wisconsin was able to win that one 33-24, but it's not like they ran away and hid. That was a 10-7 Northwestern lead at halftime. So, it's one of those things for Wisconsin where they caught Iowa in a really bad spot last week off the blowout win over Ohio State. Purdue's not a great team, and they had a ton of problems with Purdue. So I don't know what Wisconsin is at this point, and I understand the value in trying to grab close to double digits or at least more than a touchdown with this Wolverines defense because, like you said, this is going to be a low total, and you're going to have a spread here that's a good chunk of the total that comes out for this game. So, but again, I don't know what Michigan is at this point. I know they're 8-2, but their offense doesn't impress me. Their defense has had problems when they've stepped up in class. It's hard for me to take either side here in this one. Yeah,
and certainly, my lean would be the under, but I know this is going to be a really low total. I got burned by Wisconsin last week. I had Wisconsin and Iowa under the total. That was a really bad loss because, 4 defensive touchdowns in that game. You can't have 4 defensive touchdowns in a game and win low under. So, that probably won't happen again, but, this Michigan-Wisconsin total is going to be something like 40 or, really, really low total. And it's hard to take unders that are under 40 or under 39 or something like that. So I don't know if I'll play this game at all.
I will say this, the weather forecast that you mentioned, when you've got a dog getting more than a touchdown with a game that looks like it's going to, see both teams struggle to score points, maybe that's where we get a little bit of the numbers grab on Michigan is people looking ahead to that advanced forecast. And it could change, obviously, like you said, and we are still pretty far out. But, that's a number that you can grab and not feel too worried about because even if the weather forecast changes, you still have a good percentage of the total on that spread side. So I think maybe that the total package is moving this number more so than an opinion on either one of these teams.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That could be as well. And like you said a minute ago, some people just take the, +10 because they know the total is going to be that low, and I can't blame them for that either.
All right, let's go under the radar here. We'll go out to Conference USA, and we'll look at game 411, 412. Marshall, road favorite in San Antonio to take on UTSA. Long trip for the Thundering Herd here down from Huntington, West Virginia. But they're favored by 1.5 at DSI and pretty much everywhere else across the market. This one's very interesting to me. You had UTSA last week. The line looked a little bit high against UAB, and I think the line got pumped up a little bit as well before kickoff. UTSA now 0-2, trying to grab that 6th win to get bowl eligible. They got this shot here against Marshall. Next week, they're on the road in Ruston against Louisiana Tech. So you would think UTSA here, kind of that must-win situation where you would expect them to take on a little bit of money in the market. but Marshall did open a clear favorite.
Yeah, this is a really interesting game, and I don't know which side I like. I think this number is almost exactly right. I've liked Marshall a lot the whole season, but this is not a good spot for Marshall. I mean, they come off a really emotional game there last week. Obviously, the Marshall team always honors the ones who were lost in that plane crash, and last weekend was their weekend to do that, and they wore special uniforms and played well there against Western Kentucky. I think Western Kentucky covered there right at the very end with a backdoor cover, but Marshall controlled that game pretty easily. And now they go out there, like you say, to play against a UTSA team that really has to win this game. Obviously they could win next week, but you have to think that they really are pointing toward winning this game. UTSA's defense has been fairly good here of late. Last weekend against UAB didn't really do that much on offense, but UTSA had some key mistakes that really hurt them in that game. Marshall, a really key injury to keep an eye on is Tyler Brady. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right or not, but Brady, a wide receiver, 56 catches on the year for 777 yards. He's kind of their big play receiver, and he's questionable for this game. So, the key with Marshall is they don't really have much of a running game. I mean, they're only averaging 3.9 yards per carry on the season. Chase Litton has been pretty good in most games, but he's had a couple games that he's been really, really bad with interceptions. So the key for them is whether they can take care of the football. UTSA, a pretty good secondary. Like I said, I really like Marshall overall, and I'm certainly high on them still, but I don't think this is a very good spot for them.
No, it really isn't a good spot for Marshall. And I have this number. Let me see if I can find it here in my list. But, the thing that I've run into with Marshall, and I've talked about this before here on the show, is that when it comes to this defense, I didn't know where to rate them. I didn't know where to put them because they've had such a light schedule for the most part. We talked about that game against Florida Atlantic and about how maybe that was a spot where Marshall would get exposed a little bit, and Florida Atlantic moved the ball pretty efficiently in that game. Now, UTSA is not exactly a great offense, and I have this number UTSA -2, so I don't know if I'll be involved in this one with no key numbers in the mix. But with UTSA having that extra motivation, with Marshall getting a 7th win, securing their bowl spot a couple of games ago, and then of course, like you said, the tribute to the players that were lost in the plane crash. It just seems to me like it is a tough spot, coupled with the long travel to go down to UTSA, in the Alamo Dome, a spot that they're not really accustomed to playing in. It just seems like the spot, like you said, is something that's just not favorable to Marshall. But again, UTSA here the last 2 weeks, FIU seemed like they were a little bit of a paper tiger. They won that game, or they lost that game, by 7, lost to UAB. UTSA's wins this year, Baylor, which doesn't mean much of anything at this point, Southern, Texas State, who's always one of the worst teams in FBS, Rice, one of the worst teams in FBS, and UTEP, who's been 130 or 129 in my power ratings all year. So UTSA hasn't beaten a competent opponent. They've played close against a lot of teams, lost to Southern Miss by 2, North Texas by 3. They probably should have won that North Texas game. Then, the games I just mentioned, they're against FIU and UAB. So that's the problem I have with UTSA is they haven't proven they can beat any sort of competent opponent, and Marshall's a little bit more than competent. So while the spot really favors UTSA, you got to prove it to me and beat somebody that's worth something, and they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I agree. My number is Marshall -1. I've intentionally been high on Marshall all year. And like I said, I don't think there's really any line value here. But at the same time, do you really want to take UTSA? Like you said, they haven't really proven it against anybody good. And Marshall's at least a pretty good team. I think Marshall's defense is good. They're not great. Like you said, they've played a lot of weak offenses this year, which has their defensive stats skewed a bit. But to me, this is a possibly an under or probably a stay away for me.
All right, let's get into the Pick 6 segment here. 6 games, rapid-fire fashion, so we can talk a little bit of college basketball at the end. Let's start Friday night, game 319, 320. UNLV takes on New Mexico. New Mexico's a 2-point favorite.
I'm going to take UNLV just because New Mexico seems like they're really in bad shape here right now. They've been getting beat up on badly. Not excited to take UNLV because I don't know about their injury situation, but that's my slight lean here.
Yeah, this game's fascinating because New Mexico, nothing to play for, went to a bowl last year. They're not going to one this year. We talked earlier in the year about Bob Davie and the mistreatment of players that he was under suspicion for and under investigation. So, maybe the players are kind of ready for this thing to be done. But UNLV, they need 2 wins to get to a bowl game, but they got to do it on the road against New Mexico and against Nevada. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. So my numbers say New Mexico here. I got New Mexico -4 in my power ratings. That's the way I'd look. But still a pretty tough game there on Friday night. All right, let's go to Saturday here. Georgia Tech, 6-point favorite against the Duke Blue Devils, who are seeing the option for the second straight week.
I have to take Duke here. I think it's a good spot for Duke. Last weekend was a good spot for Duke as well, and I almost played them. I'm glad I didn't. But 2 weeks in a row seeing the triple option, and really Cutcliffe's teams have done pretty well against triple option long term. So Georgia Tech in a difficult spot coming off that big win. So I'll take Duke.
Yeah, I got this one right on the number pretty much at 5.5, so I don't have a power ratings play. But, yeah, Duke's seeing the option back-to-back weeks. And also I give Cutcliffe a lot of the benefit of the doubt. And maybe I've been too high on Duke throughout the season because of that. But, this is a decent spot for them, like you said. So if I had to go one way or another, I would look at the Blue Devils in this one. How about game 331, 332? UCF on the road, double-digit favorite of 14 against the Temple Owls.
I'll take Temple plus the points here. Temple's been playing a lot better here the last couple weeks, have been getting improved quarterback play. UCF's a good team, but I think laying 14 on the road is a little bit too much.
I got this one at 16, but what a brutal spot for Central Florida because they had some issues last week against UConn. I got to watch a little bit of that game. They had some defensive problems. Milton didn't have a ton of time to throw the football. Wasn't a real good look for UCF. Hasn't been a good look the last few weeks. And they play South Florida next week. Temple's been a riser in my power ratings. They've been a riser out there in the betting market as well. I'm going to be curious to see where this line goes, but I think Temple definitely the right side here in this one. All right, we'll slide on down the board a little bit here, and let's go ahead and look at how about game 369, 370? UAB's catching 10.5 in Florida against the Gators.
This is a really interesting one. I can't lay 10.5 points with Florida. So by default, I'm going to take UAB here. Florida just has not proven anything to where I can take them -10.5 against anybody right now. And UAB, such a well-coached team. I mean, we've talked about this throughout the season. I'm an Ohio State fan, but I think my second favorite team this year is UAB because I just love the fact that Bill Clark stayed there, doing a terrific job with them, and I'm going to take them plus 10.5.
I mean, that's the only way I would go here because I think they show up, and I don't think Florida does. I mean, Florida, they gave an effort against South Carolina, but that was a conference game, and, I think they just look ahead to the Florida State game coming up here next weekend. I don't think they care about playing UAB, and I don't think they care if they embarrass the program. I don't think they care if they embarrass Randy Shannon. I don't think it matters to them. But UAB, they're going to show up for this game, and I hope they win it because that might lock up Coach of the Year for Bill Clark, and damn it, that man deserves it. Game 373, 374, SMU takes on Memphis. Memphis an 11.5-point favorite.
Heads up for a really high total here. This is going to be a high-scoring game. I'm going to take Memphis. When you have that high of a total, this one's going to be probably about 80. So if you have that high of a total, then, minus 11.5 is not as big of a number as it would be in a low-totaled game. So I think Memphis is just a lot more efficient on offense, and I'm going to take Memphis.
Yeah, I think I like Memphis in this spot, too. Excuse me. Memphis is one of those teams that, they need to keep controlling their own destiny in this division. They got off to a little bit of a slow start from some weather-related things, but SMU got that 6th win. They're going to a bowl game for Chad Morris. That's a big deal for them. And, over the last 2 weeks, they've played UCF tight. They played Navy tight. I don't know if they have the depth and the wherewithal to come back with another big effort here 3 weeks in a row. Memphis, on the other hand, they can score on anybody. So I would definitely look to take the Tigers there in that one. One more game to look at, game 399, 400. New Mexico State's a 4-point road favorite against Louisiana Lafayette.
I'll take New Mexico State here. This is a much-improved team. They're better on defense than they have been, and they have some good offensive weapons. Lafayette is, to me, a team that's just mediocre. I think New Mexico State can outgun them here, so I'll take New Mexico State.
Both of these teams have 4 wins and 3 games left. So New Mexico State plays Louisiana this week, Idaho and South Alabama. Louisiana takes on New Mexico State, Georgia Southern, and then Appalachian State. So both of these teams with a lot of investment here to win this game and try and get to a bowl. But like you said, I think New Mexico State is the better team. I think they're the better offense and the better defense. So I would take New Mexico State here, laying that little price on the road. All right, let's talk a little bit of college basketball here to wrap things up for this Monday show. I know you've gotten some listener questions. We'll talk more college basketball as we go along here. Next week will probably be mostly college football again with some big-time rivalry games. But after that, we'll take another look at the college basketball side of things. So what were those listener questions that you got, Kyle?
Well, the first one was, what do you look for in early games? Stats to take note of when you're looking at you're breaking down a box score, what's important to you. And this question came from Mikey DFS, and he's a really good listener of this show, and just a good guy in general. So good to be able to talk about this one. But stats that I look at to start with, I look at tempo compared to last year. I look at that first because I'm a lot better at totals than I am at sides, especially when it comes to college basketball. So, I want to see what pace they're playing at compared to last year. I want to look for teams that are so different from last year that I'm going to get an edge on the books for a while. This is especially important when you're looking at small college or small conferences, Big West, Big Sky, stuff like that. That's why I like to focus on those a lot, because if you find one of those under-the-radar teams that has changed a lot in one of those conferences, it's going to take a lot longer for the odds makers to catch up. So from a total standpoint, I look at tempo. As far as other than that, I like to look at turnover percentage this year compared to last year. You can look at percentage of offensive plays that end in a turnover. Ken Pomeroy's website's a really good place to look at that. If you can find a team that improves their turnover percentage a lot from last year to this year, they're going to be a good against the spread bet for a while. You look for improved guard play, taking care of the basketball a lot more. I think that's a really good way to look here early in the season. And then one other thing I really like to look at quite a bit is rebounding margin. Teams that do really well in rebounding margin are very good against the spread. Most important is the defensive rebound. You'll notice that year after year, it's really, really hard to find a good team that gives up a lot of second chance points. When you give teams 2, 3, 4 chances, you're going to give up a lot of points, and you're not going to cover the spread very often. So to me, like I say, I look at the tempo, try to look for differences. Stylistically, I just want to try to find teams that are different than what they were last year. And then I go straight to turnover percentage. Are they taking care of the basketball better or worse than last year? Now, you have to be careful, obviously, if you just look at one game, because you got to consider who they play against, and you get such a small sample size that, you want to have 2 or 3 games in there at least before you even consider whether it's really a big improvement. And, I like looking at the rebounding margin, and you can look at stats and trends long-term against the spread. It's really important to be a good rebounding team. So I think rebounding is something to really keep a close eye on as well.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned Ken Pomeroy, and obviously that's kind of the holy grail when it comes to college basketball stats. Where else do you get your information?
Well, Ken Pomeroy is where I spend the most of my time easily. I get a lot of my other information by looking up things from beat writers and things like that. Now, I look at some stats from like teamrankings.com, sites like that, covers. But, Ken Pomeroy is where I start when it comes to stats, and then it comes to, just finding information about who's playing, who's not playing, or coaching schematics, things like that. I try to follow a lot of beat writers on Twitter. I think that's a really good thing to do in college basketball because, you and I have talked about this before. College basketball is the perfect one to try to find under-the-radar information. There's 351 teams, and it's really hard to follow all those teams. I mean, I don't think anybody can do it and be an expert in every single team. Maybe if you were only betting on college basketball and no other sport, then maybe you could do it. Even then, it's really hard. Obviously, not all the conferences are lined, but I think this is a perfect one to have a Twitter account and put beat writers in a list, and that's something that I do.
All right, so what else do the listeners ask?
So the other thing is we had a listener reach out who is a San Diego State fan, and he sent me a message that was just kind of talking about how they have a new coach there this year in Dutcher, And if you go from Steve Fisher to this type of game plan that they're going to have, it's going to be interesting because the listener said that, from a total standpoint, he would think that overs would have some value early on, and I agree with that. They're going to play faster pace, more offense. They have better personnel to play fast now than they have in the past as well. The only question I have here at the beginning of the season is, do they just jump right into scoring a bunch of points easily, or is it a little bit difficult for these veterans because they've played for a long time in Steve Fisher's system, ultra defensive-minded system. They play slowly. They win those grinded-out type games. My question mark would be, can San Diego State just snap their fingers and get right into being a really high-scoring team? We'll see when they play tougher competition. But I think it could be a little bit hard for them right at the beginning. So ATS, I'm not sure I'd want to bet on San Diego State in the early going, but I think that this is the type of team that I talk about, like, you want to find those coaching changes where they're going to play at a different style. And, the follow-up to that question was, some other teams that have pace or style changes. You want me to just go ahead with those?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got three other teams that I wanted to point out here that I think are really a big difference from last year. The first is Drake in the Missouri Valley Conference. And, this conference has gotten quite a bit of publicity. We'll talk about it quite a bit here in the future, although the MVC is a little bit watered down now that Wichita State's not in it. But Nico Medved, now the new coach at Drake, he's prioritizing getting better on defense. This Drake team was terrible on defense last year. They played extremely fast, wanted to try to outscore people. It didn't work. Expect a slower tempo from Drake this year and lower scoring games because their defense has to be better than they were last year. I think this team probably has the least talent in the Missouri Valley Conference, though, so I don't see any really quick turnaround coming here from Drake. So I think you could maybe find some value on unders, but I think that with Drake, it's going to be a little bit hard to back them against the spread right away because it's hard to break habits. Old habits are really difficult to break, and I think that this is one of those teams where they're going to get better on defense throughout the course of the season, but I don't know if they'll be good enough, right away to just, be a good ATS bet or not. And sorry, my voice is going away a little bit here, but Drake is one of those teams that I think is going to be better on defense than they were last year. But I think that, it's going to take some time for them to be competitive. So I think the Missouri Valley is a good conference to keep an eye on here moving forward.
I'll give you a second to take a break there and catch your breath a little bit. And, that is such an important thing when it comes to looking at those coaching changes because it's not just a new coach, it's not just new recruits and all that type of stuff. It's also that tempo change. And that tempo change is something that, can take a little while for the odds makers to pick up on, especially with a team like Drake or with a team that's well under the radar like some of the ones that you're talking about, because there are 351 teams. And odds makers have to put up a number on every game. But when you get deeper into college basketball conferences and start looking mid-major and low-major, the numbers aren't going to be as efficient. And so these are things that you can maybe pick up on several games in a row, maybe for 2, 3, 4 weeks before the books actually make the proper adjustment to them.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to look, and we'll see if we can keep an eye on some of these teams here. I think there is going to be some value, and with there being 351 teams, there are a lot of teams that are going to play quite a bit different than they were last year. It's not like the NFL where you only have 32 teams and you're going to have, not very many changes in style. So to me, college basketball lends itself to looking for these teams that have changed a lot from last season. Let's see if my voice will let me finish out on these last couple. But Youngstown State, Jared Calhoun, the new coach, he wants to play extremely fast. Everything I've read about him, he wants to be one of the fastest-paced teams in the country. Look at their first game. They lost 111-78 to Kent State, 86 possessions per team in that game, which is really, really fast. It's about as fast as you ever see in a game that's not the Citadel playing. So Youngstown State played relatively fast last year, much faster this year. Can they stop anybody, though? I mean, Kent State really lit them up in that first game. And if they're not going to play any better defense than that, Youngstown State may be a good team to fade. So let's keep an eye on them moving forward. Austin Peay, the third one I had here. Matt Figures is their new coach. He's an assistant from South Carolina under Frank Martin. He wants to install a defensive-minded team, but he acknowledges that could take some time here. It's interesting reading his notes here before the season. This is a team that had more than a third of their roster that wasn't even deemed eligible by the NCAA until a little over a month ago. So, he didn't really know what to do with this team for a long time or what he was going to have. Talking about wanting to play a 3-2 zone, which is certainly unique. And I really like this one because we like to talk about teams that are unique and are doing things different. Figures said that he wants to play a different style and a different type of game than anybody else is going to play because he wants it to be difficult for other teams to prepare for because they're not used to it. So Austin Peay is going to consistently play really big. Everybody on the court is going to be 6'5" or taller at all times, is what he says here in the notes. So if you play every single person on the court is going to be 6'5" or taller in that kind of a conference there in the OVC, you're going to be a lot different than everybody else. So I'm really interested to see how Austin Peay does with that.
Oh, it should be fascinating to look at. And I know, Mike, you also had a question about the SEC. So we'll talk about the SEC for college basketball next week, because I'm sure we'll talk about the SEC for college football next week as well. But Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. What's going on over there at the website right now, man?
Well, if you haven't signed up already for the newsletter, be sure to sign up for that. I believe it's 58 and 28 in the last free plays, 86 free plays. So be sure to sign up for that and get free plays there on the weekend. Also have some free pick articles going up at HunterSportsPicks.com, so be sure to check that out.
And you can follow Kyle on Twitter at KyleHunterPicks. Kyle Hunter, great to get you back on the show here this week, and we'll talk to you again next week, man.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks, man.